Your daddy was giving you grief about it, and I said, John, let's don't get old too soon. I mean, if I had hair like that, I'd have it down to my shoulders. But on that night, I was almost out of time, and people were to be present, and people were asking me, well, if you could do one more thing, what it would be, or what do you wish you had done that you didn't, and all that kind of stuff. And someone asked me that night, because I had many friends in Atlanta, and I said, if I could just do one thing, if God came to me tonight and said, okay, your time's up, you got to go home, and I'm not a genie, I'm not giving you 3 wishes. One thing, what would it be? I said, I would infect every American with whatever it was that John Lewis got as a 4-year-old kid and took through a lifetime to keep moving and keep moving in the right direction and keep bringing other people to move and to do it without hatred in his heart, with a song, to be able to sing and dance. As John's brother Freddie said in Troy, keep moving to the ballot box, even if it's a mailbox, and keep moving to the beloved community. John Lewis was many things, but he was a man, a friend in sunshine and storm, a friend who would walk the stony roads that he asked you to walk, that would brave the chastening rods he asked you to be whipped by, always keeping his eyes on the prize, always believing none of us will be free until all of us are equal. I just loved him. I always will. And I'm so grateful that he stayed true to form. He's gone up yonder and left us with marching orders. I suggest, since he's close enough to God to keep his eye on the sparrow and us, we salute, suit up, and march on.
Good day. I'm not sure, morning, afternoon, whatever it is. It's an honor to be here with each and every one of you. Reverend Warnock, thank you for enabling us all to be here in the Ebenezer Baptist Church to honor and celebrate the life of John Lewis with 3 presidents of the United States. Isn't that exciting? President Clinton, President Bush, and soon President Obama here with us. On behalf of my colleagues as Speaker of the House, I'm pleased to bring greetings to each and every one of you. I'm sad to bring condolences to the family, to John, Miles, to the entire Lewis family. Thank you for sharing John Lewis with us. I'm pleased to be here with so many members, 50. We would have had more, except coronavirus prevented the church from allowing us to bring more. But I hope they will all stand, members of the House of Representatives. Senators Harris and Booker, who are with us as well. Senators Harris and Booker. Among them, Mr. Hoyer, Steny Hoyer, Mr. Clyburn, Jim Clyburn, and I served with John Lewis for over 30 years. Over 30 years. And in our group, we have senior members and we have members of our freshman class, John convinced each one of us that we were his best friend in Congress. And we come with a flag flown over the Capitol the night that John passed. When this flag flew there, it said goodbye. It waved goodbye to John, our friend, our mentor, our colleague, this beautiful man that we all had the privilege of serving with in the Congress of the United States. So again, we all bring our condolences to the family and to Michael Collins and John's staff, who meant so very much to him. Thank you for your service to John Lewis. There are many things we're grateful to the family for and to the staff for, and we commend them for, but let's acknowledge the stamina they have had to keep up with John even as he passed on from Troy to Selma to Montgomery to Washington and now to Atlanta to be at rest. When John Lewis served with us, he wanted us to see the civil rights movement and the rest through his eyes. He told us so many stories. He taught us so much. And he took us to Selma for 2 decades, Mr. President. He took us to Selma. You referenced 25 years. Some of us were there many, many times, including 50th anniversary where President Bush was, as well as President Obama. And he wanted us to see how important it was to understand the spirit of nonviolence. I hesitate to speak about nonviolence in the presence of the master himself, Reverend Lawson, who we'll be hearing from shortly. We were together just recently in Selma when he and John spoke at church, and he taught the world really about nonviolence. But I just want to say this. The word satyagraha is a word that in Sanskrit means 2 things. It means nonviolence, and it means insistence on the truth. And that is what John Lewis was all about. Nonviolently insisting on the truth. He insisted on the truth in Nashville, in Selma, in Washington, D.C., at Lincoln Memorial. He insisted on the truth wherever he went. And he insisted on the truth in the Congress of the United States. Every time he stood up to speak, we knew that he was going to take us to a higher place of our understanding of what our responsibilities were and what our opportunities were. And he insisted, no matter how, shall we say, offended someone might be, that he would insist on the truth. What he said, in my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love, and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn, he says in this article that the President referenced, to let freedom ring. He always talked about truth marching on. He always worked for a more perfect union. Over the 4th of July weekend, I had the privilege of visiting with John, and I brought him this flag pin that I wear, one just like it. Why I did so on that 4th of July weekend was because it is engraved with something that says, "One country, one destiny." Now, wasn't that what John Lewis was all about? One country, one destiny. I mention it because this was embroidered into the lining of Abraham Lincoln's coat that he had on the night he left us. I think he had the coat on all the time, but also that night. And John Lewis and Abraham Lincoln had so much in common. We got to know him first and foremost in front of the Lincoln Memorial when he made that beautiful, beautiful speech. John, land state, under the rotunda, in the rotunda of the Capitol, under the dome of the Capitol, on a catafalque, a platform that was made in 1865 to hold the casket of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, John Lewis. John Lewis. So they had lots of connections. And by the way, just incidentally, they were both wonderful and spiritual and saintly, but they were both very good politicians. Think of John Lewis that way. You who know him know that. He always was about a more perfect union. And he was always about young people. That's why, Mr. President, that article you referenced in the New York Times today, his message that would be delivered at this time as he left us, was about young people. He said to them, together you can redeem the world. Together, always perfect union, together, one nation, one destiny. And he says in the article, answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe in. Wasn't that just like John? We were very proud to have his voice in the rotunda speaking about all that he cared about and believed in such a beautiful way, starting in Troy. I started my remarks by talking about the flag that waved over the Capitol to say goodbye to John as he began his passage. But what I want you to know, in addition to how revered he is in the Congress, so revered that, he was a bit mischievous. When he would say, let's make some good trouble, he always had sort of a twinkle in his eye and a kind of a spark about it all. And my colleagues can tell you that when he cooked up having the sit-in to get the Republican leadership to put the gun violence prevention bill on the floor, when he did that and all the members followed him, the floor was covered with people, and thought for a moment that perhaps the police might, because it was disruptive, good trouble. It was clear to them that if they were to arrest John Lewis for doing that, they were going to have to arrest the entire House Democratic caucus. So when he spoke, people listened. When he led, people followed. We loved him very much. As his official family, we mourn him greatly. He shared so much with that his love for his district, his family. The sadness when Lillian was sick, the joy he had in John Miles. But as I said, we waved goodbye to this person, our leader, our friend, this, shall we say, humorous. He loved to dance. He loved to make us laugh, sometimes while he was dancing. He said, my granddaughter Bella said to him, did you ever sing in the civil rights movement? He said, they asked me to sing solo one time. Solo so that nobody could hear me. But anyway, getting back to that flag-waving goodbye to this person we had just loved officially, personally, in every way, politically too. The last night he was at the Capitol, it wasn't raining. Thousands of people were showing up to pay their respects. A little bit after 8 o'clock, there was a double rainbow. A double rainbow. But it hadn't rained. It was a double rainbow over the casket. And for us, it was, we waved goodbye when he started to leave us. He was telling us, I'm home in heaven. I'm home in heaven with Lillian. We always knew he worked on the side of the angels, and now he is with them. May he rest in peace. Thank you.
Lewis family that so wonderfully nurtured John in love and hope and courage and faith and the rest of it. And sisters and brothers. Czesław Miłosz, a Polish Catholic poet, sets the tone, at least in part for me, as John Lewis has journeyed from the eternity of this extraordinary, mysterious human race into the eternity that none of us know very much about. When he wrote this poem called Meaning, when I die, I will see the lining of the world, the other side, beyond bird, mountain, sunset. The true meaning ready to be decoded. What never added up will now add up. What was incomprehensible will become comprehended. And if there is no lining to the world, if a thrush on a branch is not a sign, but just a thrush on a branch, if night and day make no sense following each other, and on this earth there is nothing but the earth, even if that is so, there will remain a word out of eternity, will be heard by us again and again, running through the galaxies, still proclaiming that we, the people of the USA, can one day live up to the full meaning of we hold these truths. Live up to the full meaning, we, the people of the USA, in order to perfect a more perfect union. John Lewis practiced not the politics that we call bipartisan. John Lewis practiced the politics that we, the people of the U.S., need more desperately than ever before, the politics of the Declaration of Independence, the politics of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. I've read many of the so-called civil rights books of the last 50 or 60 years, about the period between 1953 and 1973. Most of the books are wrong about John Lewis. Most of the books are wrong about how John got engaged in the Nashville campaign of 1959-60. This is the 60th year of the sit-in campaign, which swept into every state of the Union, largely manned by students because we recruited students, but put upon the map that the nonviolent struggle begun in Montgomery, Alabama, was not an accident, but as Martin King Jr. called it, Christian love has power that we have never tapped, and if we use it, we can transform not only our own lives, but we will transform the earth in which we live. I count it providential that as I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, dropping out of graduate school, in Nashville came people like Kelly Miller Smith and Andrew White and Janetta Hayes and Helen Roberts and Dolores Wilkerson and John Lewis, and Diane Nash, C.T. Vivian, Marion Berry, Jim Bevel, Bernard Lafayette, Paulina Knight, Angela Butler. How all of us gathered in 1958 and 59 and 60 and 61 and 62 in the same city at the same time, I count as being providential. We did not plan it. We were all led there. And when Kelly Miller Smith and the Nashville Christian Leadership Council met in the fall of 1958, and we determined that if there's to be a second major campaign that will demonstrate the efficacy of satyagraha, of soul force, of love truth, that we would have to do it in Nashville. And so I planned, as the strategist and organizer, a 4-point Gandhian strategic program to create the campaign. We decided with great fear and anticipation we would desegregate downtown Nashville. No group of black people or other people anywhere in the United States in the 20th century against the rapaciousness of a segregated system ever thought about desegregating downtown, tearing down the signs, renovating the waiting rooms, taking the immoral signs off of drinking fountains. But it was black women who made that decision for us in Nashville. I was scared to death when we made that decision. I knew nothing about how we were going to do this. I had never done it before. But we planned the strategy. John Lewis did not stumble in on that campaign. Kelly Miller Smith, his teacher at ABC, invited John to join the workshops in the fall of 1959 as we prepared ourselves to face violence and to do direct action and to put on the map the issue that the racism and the segregation of the nation had to end. And so in the 60th anniversary of that sit-in campaign, which became the second major campaign of the nonviolent movement of America. Those are not my words. John Lewis called what we did between 1953 and 1973 the nonviolent movement of America, not the CRM. I think we need to get the story straight, because words are powerful. History must be written in such a fashion that it lifts up truly the spirit of the John Lewises of the world. And that's why I've chosen just to say a few words about it. Kelly Miller Smith invited John Lewis. I met a Fisk student who told me about a student from Chicago who wanted to do something about those vicious signs. I said, invite Diane Nash to the workshop in September, because we're going to do something about those signs. I pushed this hard. Now, John Lewis had no choice in the matter. You should understand that. Because all the stories we've heard this morning of John becoming a preacher, preaching to the chickens and other sorts of things, becoming ordained as a Baptist minister. Something else was happening to John in those early years. John saw the malignancy of racism in Troy, Alabama. There formed in him a sensibility that he had to do something about it. He did not know what that was, but he was convinced that he was called, indeed, to do whatever he could do, get in good trouble, but stop the horror that so many folk lived through and in this country in that part of the 20th century. John was not alone. Martin King had the same experience as a boy. I had the same experience from age 4 in the streets of Massillon, Ohio. Matthew McCullum, a pastor whose name you don't know in South Carolina, had the same experience. C.T. Vivian had the same experience. I maintain that many of us had no choice to do what we tried to do, primarily because at an early age we recognized the wrong under which we were forced to live, and we swore to God that by God's grace we would do whatever God called us to do in order to put on the table of the nation's agenda. This must end. Black Lives Matter. And so between 1953 and 1973, we had major campaigns year after year, thousands of demonstrations across the nation that supported it. We had folk in the Congress, folk in the White House, folks scattered across the United States who were beginning to formulate what the solutions are for change. The media makes a mistake when John is seen only in relationship to the Voting Rights Bill of '65. However important that is, you must not remember that in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson and the Congress of the United States passed the most advanced legislation on behalf of we, the people of the United States, that was ever passed. Head Start. Billions of dollars for housing. We would not be in the struggle we are today in housing if President Reagan hadn't cut that billions of dollars for housing, where local churches and local nonprofits could build affordable housing in their own communities, being sustained and financed by loans from the federal government. We passed Medicare. We passed anti-poverty programs. Civil Rights Bill 64, 65, voting rights bills. A whole array. John Lewis, must be understood as one of the leaders of the greatest advance of Congress and the White House on behalf of we, the people of the USA. We do not need bipartisan politics if we're going to celebrate the life of John Lewis. We need the Constitution to come alive. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We need the Congress and the presidents to work unfalteringly on behalf of every boy and every girl so that every baby born on these shores will have access to the tree of life. That's the only way to honor John Robert Lewis. No other way. Let all of us in this service today, let all the people of the USA determine that we will not be quiet as long as any child dies in the first year of life in the United States. We will not be quiet as long as the largest poverty group in our nation are women and children. We will not be quiet as long as our nation continues to be the most violent culture in the history of humankind. We will not be quiet as long as our economy is shaped not by freedom, but by plantation capitalism that continues to cause domination and control rather than access and liberty and equality for all. The forces of spiritual wickedness are strong in our land because of our history. We have not created them. John Lewis did not create them. We inherited them. But it's our task to see those spiritual forces. I've named them: racism, sexism, violence, plantation capitalism. Those poisons still dominate far too many of us in many different ways. John's life was a singular journey from birth through the campaigns in the South, and through Congress, to get us to see that these forces of wickedness must be resisted. Do not let our own hearts drink any of that poison. Instead, drink the truth of the life force. If we would honor and celebrate John Lewis's life, let us then recommit our souls, our minds, our hearts, our bodies, our strength to the continuing journey to dismantle the wrong in our midst and to allow a space for the new earth and new heaven to emerge. I close with this poem from Langston Hughes, which is a kind of a sign and symbol of what John Lewis represents and what we too can represent in our continuing journey. Langston Hughes. I dream a world where no human, no other human will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a dream where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black and white and yellow and blue and green and red and brown. Whatever your race may be, will share the bounties of the earth. And every woman and man and boy and girl is free. Where wretchedness hangs its head, and joy, like a pearl, attends the need of all humankind. Of such a world, I dream. Celebrate life. Dream and labor for an Atlanta and Los Angeles and the United States and a world. That is to celebrate the spirit and the heart and the mind and soul of John Lewis, and to walk with him through the galaxies, seeking equality, liberty, justice, and the beloved community for all. Thank you.
Three living presidents with us today. We have heard from yet another. To the friends and family of Congressman John Lewis, Rosalind joins me in sending our condolences to all gathered today to mourn the loss of one of our nation's great leaders. Throughout his remarkable life, John has been a blessing to countless people, and we are proud to be among those whose lives he has touched. While his achievements are enjoyed by all Americans, we Georgians know him as our neighbor, friend, and representative. His enormous contributions will continue to be an inspiration for generations to come. Please know that you are in our hearts and prayers during this difficult time. We hope your warm memories and the love and prayers of your family and friends will be of comfort to you in the days ahead. Sincerely, Jimmy Carter.
If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody that he's traveling wrong, then my living as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Oh, if I can do my duty as a Christian, oh, if I can bring back beauty in a world abroad, if I could share love's message that the Master taught, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Yes, my living, yes, it shall not be in vain. If I could help somebody, if I could help somebody as I pass along, then my living, it shall not. Then my living, it shall not. Then his living, yes, shall not. Hallelujah. His living shall not. Then my living shall not be in vain. His living shall not be in vain.
I want to first call attention to the excellent job the media has done to inform us of John Lewis. Hasn't the media been tremendous in keeping us informed? I've never seen such coverage, but John deserved it. But I want to talk a moment in my presentation on John before he became famous. I met John. I came to Atlanta. Lillian Miles and I came to Atlanta on the same day. She came to work at the university, Atlanta University, and I came to work for Martin Luther King Jr. in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And that's when I met John. Saw him all the time. We were all involved in the same quest for equity and justice in this America. And I got a chance to see him all the time. And I admired his fervor and all of his tenacity. And Lillian was single. And so I decided that Lillian needed a good man, not just the bums who were approaching her. She was highly intellectual, well-traveled, well-educated, and I wanted her to have someone who really would appreciate her skills and her talent. So I looked around and decided that I liked John. But Lillian didn't like John particularly. And so she thought he was kind of slow. And I said, but Lillian, he's busy. He's fighting the evils of the world. And she said, yes, but. Well, I decided, girl, listen, this boy is going places. So let's see what he can do to get this thing moving. So we decided, well, I did, as her friend. And that's what you do for friends. You have to help them out. And so John had to go to the hospital for an examination, and I said, oh, Lillian, this would be a good moment for us to be Florence Nightingale. So we went to the grocery store and bought a little bunch of flowers and took it to the hospital. I said, he'll be impressed, because he was a little slow, too. And I said, we'll go to the hospital, and that would just impress him, that he will notice you more because you're bringing him flowers while he's in the hospital. Well, we got in the hospital, and there was a young woman already there, and she was straightening out his pillow and adjusting his comfort. And then Lillian said, oh, shoot. Well, I said, but I've already asked John, John, do you have a young woman who you are especially interested in? And he said, well, not really. And I said, that's not the answer I'm looking for. I want a more definitive answer, because I got some things in mind. Well, you know, John was just slow about, well, not really. Well, I decided on New Year's Eve. Lillian was single, as I said, and didn't have any plans. So I said, well, I'll have a dinner party, invite the two of them, and maybe they'll give us a chance. Well, I was known as the one who gave big parties, so Lillian thought I was going to have a big party. John thought I was having a big party. When they got to my house, there was only room for 3 of us. The 2 of them and me. And so now we're discussing the wiles of the world, and I'm hoping now that they're going to get a little closer and closer. Well, and when John didn't have a date, on New Year's Eve, I knew he didn't have a commitment. Everybody has a date on New Year's Eve with somebody somewhere. So I figured, well, I'm ahead of the game now. It's New Year's Eve, and here I've got him. And then things start happening. And still slowly, not fast enough for me, but I was patient. And finally, Lillian said, I do like him. I said, okay, I'm ready now. I set a date, got her dress ready, and we're going to have a wedding. And so, and I'm not really sure, I asked John not too long ago, did we ever ask you, would you take her? I don't think I ever got him an opportunity to propose. We just had a wedding. And so now, it looks like things were going to be okay. So we had a big wedding. I did all the planning because Lillian was still slow. And I did all the planning and had the big wedding. All the family came, so we had a wedding. Now, things were doing okay. And she said, you know, but I don't like the idea of that girl. Looks like she had, you know, some designs on John. I said, honey, don't run away from competition. We can handle competition. We'll get rid of that girl so fast she won't know what happened to her. And we did. And they got married. Well, I want you to know they were very happy. But when she found out, now Lillian, as I said, well-traveled, well-educated, but she absolutely didn't like politics. Sorry, people, she didn't like politics. But when John expressed an interest, Lillian got in there and became his strongest supporter. I mean, she did everything to make his successes work for him, and they did. Well, then John Miles came along, and he was the cutest little boy. And then she said, they gave me the honor of being his godmother. And I said, oh, that's nice, and I've heard of godmothers, but what does godmother do? What am I supposed to do? And she said, well, if something happens to me and John, we want you to take care of him. I said, we got to feed him? Because John Miles could eat as a kid. And I said, got to feed him every day? And he said, yes. And then spank him when he acts up. Well, I agreed to that. But John Miles, do you mind? Just stand up, John Miles, stand up. There's John Miles now. Now wait a minute. Take a good look at John Miles. I'm 4'11", and they tell me almost 90 years old. And there he is. And I'm supposed to spank him when he doesn't do right. Now, when I walk up to John Miles to give him a spanking, I got to get permission from him. Can I spank you? Because he's pretty big now. But I loved John Miles then, and I love John Miles now. And I will take care of you and spank you whether you like it or not. Okay. But Lillian and John stayed married. I put it together, but it lasted 43 years. That's not a bad record, is it? They were happy, and Lillian gave him every support a wife could ever give a partner. And they gave love to John Miles in the process. John was an unusual individual. Ambassador Young is sitting over here, and we all loved him all the time. His sincerity was apparent. He worked hard, and he said that he wasn't going to stop. And I don't need to tell you anything about John. All of you knew him. All of you know his fervor and his commitment to equity and the love he had for everybody. And I want us to look at the John we thought we knew, the John who convinced us we knew the real man because he was constant. But I asked him one time, John, what in the world is bad trouble. I said when I was a young girl, my sister and I, we were courting. Every time we'd go out on a date, my mother said, okay, have a good time, but don't get in no trouble. Well, we didn't know nothing else except trouble was not good. But John said, the good trouble is when your mother says, don't get in trouble, find a way to right the wrongs of our society. And he did a pretty decent job of that. And during this week, John was on television all day, every day. And I love young people. And I had an opportunity when people know that I like young people. So I was invited to speak to a group of kids. And I said to them, as you're watching television, I want you to know that's not a public relations program you're watching. That's a story of a man who lived the life they're talking about. John made a decision on the kind of life he was going to live. And I said to those young people that you have the responsibility of making your life have the meaning you want it to be. You can either decide to be the bank robber or the bank owner. It's your choice. The man you're seeing on television decided that his life was going to have a quality to it. Do as much as you can, as long as you can, as often as you can, because that's what John Lewis did. We won't forget John, but I would want to tell you, don't sit here and listen to these praises. Don't forget what you read in the newspapers, how wonderful he was. Do something about the man he asked us to be in ourselves, and that is be kind to everybody, love everybody, speak up and speak out. I don't need to tell you that. You know what he said. But what you can do, and I want to advise you and admonish you to really give meaning to the John we love, vote. Thank you.
To John Miles, Obama, Speaker Pelosi, Madam Mayor. Romans 8:18 tells us, "For I consider the sufferings of the present time to not be worthy of the glory which shall be revealed to us." When I met John Lewis over 40 years ago, our lives intersected because in 1960 he came to my hometown, Raleigh, North Carolina, to form SNCC at a small black college, Shaw University, where my father, who is president of the NAACP, led nightly civil rights demonstrations. Again, in 1963, our lives intersected because my father returned from the March on Washington, and he began raving about a speaker, young John Lewis, who had electrified the crowd. And so imagine when I finally met him in Atlanta in 1976 as a young law student, it was a transcendent moment, like meeting a historical figure Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, but yet here was someone who had made America live up to those noble words.
Right.
Along with Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and Andy Young and Joseph Lowry and C.T. Vivian, another lion who we lost on the same day as John Lewis. John had an incorruptible integrity and an ideological purity which was like a halo. Somehow this extended to everyone who was in his orbit, myself included. And that's the reason the nation has paused from pandemic and protests and politics to bid him farewell today. Virtually every news organization has hailed John as a civil rights hero. But John was a women's rights hero, a gay rights hero, a senior rights hero, a workers' hero, an immigrant rights hero. John wasn't on the right side of history. History was on the right side of John Lewis. And in his spare time, he introduced the legislation to create the African American History Museum. And he fought the bigots in Congress for 15 years until he triumphed yet again against insurmountable odds. One of his proudest moments was standing at the dedication of that monumental structure 4 years ago. And for those who wondered if perhaps his time had passed, with his body ravaged with cancer, so frail and fragile that he yielded to a cane, in what he surely knew would be his last public appearance, he summoned the strength to walk to the middle of Black Lives Plaza in Washington, D.C., to express his solidarity and support for the young protesters who have begun to change America, as John Lewis did as a young man. They say that the victors write history, and so I declare today that the history of the 20th century, as it is written, John Lewis will stand beside Gandhi and King and Mandela as one of the great transformative freedom fighters of humankind. And while the nation mourns a great leader, I will miss a dear, loving, and loyal friend who allowed me the extraordinary privilege to walk along beside a living saint, St. Louis. In the last days of his life, when we both knew that death was imminent, I desperately wanted to tell John about how much he had meant to me and to the country. But in a solemn moment, he pulled me closer and he whispered, "Everyone has to vote in November. It is the most important election ever." And I promised him that with every fiber in my body, I would tell everyone, if you truly want to honor this humble hero, make sure that you vote. 1 Corinthians tells us when faith, hope, and love remain, the greatest of these is love. John Lewis was love. Good night, sweet prince, and may flights of angels carry thee to thy rest. Thank you.
afternoon. I have on two masks because I have Mr. Lewis's voice in my head, and he would say, be particular. My name is Jamila Thompson, and on behalf of the staff, I would like to thank John Miles and the entire Lewis family for the honor and the privilege of sharing the Congressman and Mrs. Lewis, who was his partner in life and in public service with generations of the staff for the last 33 years in the celebration of his life and his legacy. The Congressman would want me to tell you, as I look at you today in his favorite color, that you look good, you look fresh, you look clean, you look beautiful. Thank you. We are honored to serve you, and we were honored to serve him. We would also like to express our sincere and our great appreciation to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Majority Leader, the Majority Whip, the Clerk of the House of Representatives, the Office of Employee Assistance, the Congressional Black Caucus, and all of your amazing staff for your patience and your guidance during this very difficult time. People always ask us, what was it like to work for Congressman Lewis? What was he like up close? What was he like in real life? And it is too difficult to explain, so our answer was always the same. He's just as you may imagine, but better, and that no day was ever the same. What you know about the Congressman is true. He was a gentleman. He was truly of the people and a peaceful soul. When he came into the office every single day, he would greet every staffer, every fellow, every intern with a good morning, sir, a good morning, ma'am. He would end every request, every successful speech, every successful bill, every hearing, every markup with, thank you, young brother. Thank you, sister. Thank you, my child, or my dear. As staff, we felt it was our duty to create and maintain a space where the Congressman could be completely and wholly himself. In college, we often say that there's the freshman 15 that you gain a little bit around. Well, in our office, there was the John Lewis 20, because he and Michael would bring in lunch and far, far too often dessert, because some cake or some pie or some brownie would be calling out to them in the grocery store, and they would want everyone to come together and sit down and share a meal. We were a little family, a little enclave. A lot of drama, a lot of fun, and so much love. He broke down those work barriers, and he welcomed our parents, our spouses, our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, our godchildren, and our friends into the circle, making them fall equally in awe of his greatness. Sometimes the world got a little glimpse of our nest during these impromptu gatherings, and certain videos may go viral. Well, we were like a well-oiled machine when it came to policy and casework. Although we were like that in public, he enjoyed stirring things up in the office. You might call him a little bit of an instigator. He would get us in trouble with Michael, try and corner us with questions, and stir things up. And with time, you knew not to take the bait. And you would learn to say, oh no, Congressman, you're not going to get me today. And he would laugh. I think that that's what I'm going to miss the most. I'm going to miss his laugh. And not the one that you see on television, but the one where he would be sitting back and shooting the wind, and he would throw back his head, and he would just laugh from his heart, from his belly, from his soul. So many workers are often taught to be invisible, but with Mr. Lewis, he always saw you and made you feel special and worthy. Dr. King and Rosa Parks spent time with him as a teenager, and it changed the course of his life. So I believe that he spent every waking moment paying it forward. He could be absolutely exhausted, but still take one more picture, spend one more moment, especially with young people. This meant that we were always, always, always behind schedule. So the very first lesson in staffing the congressman was to learn to operate on John Lewis time, which translates into late, but trusting that it would always work out. As he told everyone, he could outwalk the entire staff. And so our duty was to keep up. When it was time to move, we did. But when it was time to be present, and the congressman needed a little bit of quiet, we would try to create that space. He would slow down to appreciate and absorb the majesty of the moment for his own mental archives. Just as we tried to preserve the sanctity of his space, he allowed us to be our true and authentic selves, just the very best version. He found staff who were unique, and I think represented either a little bit of his personality or what he needed to complement it. We made our ways to Mr. Lewis through very random paths, coincidences, some strategies or others, and for believers, through divine intervention. He didn't hire based on a resume, but your energy, your being, your essence, your passion, and your potential. We were a medley group of musicians, air traffic controllers, photographers, dancers, social workers, entertainers, artists, historians, and every once in a while an actual lawyer or a political scientist. He got all into our business. And was there in spirit or in person for the big moments. In the same way that he always took a call from Mrs. Lewis or John Miles, he let us drop everything in a family emergency. And generations of children have fond memories of hanging out in his office as their parents worked nearby. He let us be ourselves, especially when it came to civic participation. He let us organize, protest, testify, and always, always, always vote. We tried to absorb his energy and his lessons. To my knowledge, 3 staff served him for over 20 years. Ruth Berg, Terry Butler, and first cousin, Michael Collins. May you please stand. And there's a whole generation of staff who are right behind them at 19, at 15, at 17, at 12, at 10 years, at 14 years. Ruth Riley, Brenda Jones, Jared McKinley, Rochelle O'Neill. And then there are the staffers who could never really leave, like Linda Chastain and Jacob Gillison, whom he kept pulling back in as friends and confidants. Although some of you and some people moved on, you couldn't really, because his spirit was in you forever. His voice is always in our head. Be kind, be mindful, be particular. Make it plain, make it simple, make it sing. Working for him was a little bit of a nightmare sometimes. because no matter how hard we worked, he always worked harder. Every single day he woke up at the crack of dawn, watched the news, and read the newspapers. His memory was like a living encyclopedia, which means he forgot nothing and could pull something back from 10 years ago because he knew it was the same staff and we were still there. He expected us to be informed with facts from primary sources, not hearsay. And when he walked into the office, he would ask what constituents were calling and writing about and add that information to his endless archives. You learned the hard way, or the subtle way, because he was not direct, that when he asked you a question, he usually knew the answer, but wanted to see whether or not you could represent him and his constituents. When preparing for a big vote or a big speech, he would drop a subtle hint. Have you read this poem, this speech, a book, some scripture? Do you remember this painting? And then he would say, let's come back and talk about it later on. This little hint would prepare you for the aftermath of those executive sessions that he had with himself. And after those sessions, we would learn how and in which direction the Spirit moved him. And then we would have our marching orders. He would take the essence of a complicated policy and make it accessible and real to the people. The congressman loved serving on the Ways and Means Committee. He always showed up, and he hated to miss votes on the floor. Let me say that again. He could not stand to miss votes. The voice messages I have from him about the votes that he was about to miss are still on my phone to this day. This is the reason why we are so thankful that Congressman Kildee and his staff were willing to serve and to help us cast his ballots during this pandemic and to serve as his proxy. The congressman would walk the halls or sit in committee or sit in the office, and he loved the beauty of the House of Representatives. He loved its closeness to the people and the complicated reflection of the status of our nation. Every visitor to our office received a full dose of Southern hospitality, the offer of a Georgia Coke, some peanuts, a brief tour of his office, and some time on our beloved balcony with its stunning view of the US Capitol. While he loved this country and all its people, the record should be clear on his immense pride in representing Georgia's 5th Congressional District. He was so proud to represent Metro Atlanta and all of its cities, all of its counties, and all of its people. He was on a mission to serve, to make them feel heard, respected, and represented, regardless of where they fell on the political spectrum. The constituents were our compass, and Congressman Lewis worked around the clock to find solutions to their challenges. When it came to public service and public policy, his name did not need to be on the headlines or on the front lines. It was the action and the results that mattered. Not every problem needs a bill. And he could always find compromise without compromising his values or his principles when the challenge presented itself. He played the long game, and he knew every trick in the book, and he expected the staff to fight in a nonviolent manner for the people. When constituents were concerned about the rights of Soviet Jewry, he took action. When faced with inequality in health services, he advanced technical changes to reduce the cost and increase services to life-saving care, especially for the issues that affected communities of color, like kidney disease and COPD. When workers faced pensions issues, he found ways to give them security. When families were separated by immigration policies, he worked around the clock to reunite them. When people couldn't get their Social Security checks, he fought, and sometimes for years, to make that happen. When taxpayers and workers struggled with an outdated bureaucracy of the IRS, he worked to modernize the entire agency. When he heard from frustrated veterans, he fought for their respect, their earned benefits, and their care. When he saw an alarming increase in abusive relationships, he developed strategies to stop the cycle before it began. When some tried to eliminate the U.S. Institute of Peace, he found a way and built a coalition to keep that building and the prospect and the hope of peace still alive. When he was worried about the state of our globe for generations yet unborn, he introduced the Environmental Justice Act. When looking at the rights of marginalized communities around the world, he worked to diversify the face of our diplomacy and insert empathy and standards to our global policies. And when people complained about immovable lines to vote, he co-wrote the Voter Empowerment Act. The list is too long to recognize his legislative and policy successes and the impact that he has on people across the nation and around the world. So I ask you, as we sit in this historic space, and as you drive through Metro Atlanta and you feel and you see the greatness of his legacy, historic preservation and civic education, I ask that you hold that in your heart and your soul and your spirit. He felt that we needed to know and study our history to make sure that we never repeated it. He was both human and divine. It is so difficult to explain the magnitude, the genius, the gentle grace of this man. I would ask at this moment for the staff to take a stand, please, so that you can see and know just a sample of who we are. Former staff. Thank you. A few years ago, we had a reunion, and we realized that there aren't that many staff. We have a lot of interns and a lot of fellows, but the congressman held us close. I don't think that there are many offices where you have the opportunity to hold your boss's hand and to adjust his tie and to tell every person that you love them. He created this space. He created this family. As a staff, we are heartbroken. We are lost. But we know that the work continues. The fight remains. And we must not get lost in the sea of despair. So if asked how you may honor the congressman, I will echo the words of the greats who stood here before. You can make sure that his work, his sacrifice, his message lives on, and that there are actions that every person can do regardless of their age or their station in life. Be kind, be mindful, recognize the dignity and the worth of every human being. Be the best version of yourself. Be informed, stay engaged, even though the work is hard. And if you are of age and eligible, for the love of God, please vote. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sheila O'Brien, and I am the sixth niece of Congressman John Lewis. To each distinguished guest, member of clergy, family, and friends, on behalf of the Lewis family, we would like to say thank you from the very depths of our hearts for the outpour of love, support, words of encouragement, and prayer. The honor, the respect, the camaraderie that has been bestowed upon the Lewis family will never be forgotten. We would also like to take this opportunity to give a heartfelt thanks to the Chief of Staff, Michael Collins, who has now become first cousin, and to each staff member that has worked tirelessly with and for Congressman Lewis, especially during this time. Words are not enough to express how grateful we are for all that you have done, especially for our cousin, John Miles. I am here today to pay tribute to a man that was larger than life. To the world, he is known as the Honorable Congressman John Lewis. But to his siblings, he is affectionately known as Robert. And to his many nieces and nephews, he is known as Uncle Robert. So if you would permit me to just call him Uncle Robert right now, I'd be grateful. Uncle Robert loved his family, and we, as you can tell, loved him. He was the son to our grandparents, Eddie Lewis, who we called Granddaddy Buddy, and Willie Mae Lewis, who we called Ma. He was the husband to one wife, our Aunt Lillian, the father to one son, our cousin John Miles, and the brother to a lot of siblings. Too many to name right now, we don't have time. While we knew how important he and his work was to the world, when we were with him, we saw Uncle Robert. We saw the man that enjoyed spending time with his family, reminiscing about days gone by, catching up on family dynamics, enjoying a good meal, sharing laughter and love. We, like the world, knew the John Robert Lewis that personified hope, courage, bravery, and sheer humanitarianism. As we all know, before he was chosen to Congress, yes, I say chosen, because the Word of God tells me that many are called, but few are chosen. His first call was to that of the civil rights movement. For the last 60 years, as a non-violent civil rights activist, he was the voice for those that couldn't speak, the feet for those that couldn't walk, and the champion of injustice for those that couldn't fight. He, along with many other civil rights icons, became the change agents that the world so desperately needed. As a member of Congress, he was known as the conscience of Congress. For over 30 years, he stood in solidarity with the 5th Congressional District of Georgia. He has been recognized, revered, and held to the highest esteem for the work he's done to build a better community. He broke barriers. He tore down walls. He defied stereotypes and refused to be moved from his stance on injustice, liberty, and freedom. He made time for everyone and was always picture ready. He did not miss an opportunity for a photo op or to just take a few moments to talk to his constituents or to those that revered him. His love was contagious, and it could be felt each time you were in his presence. Over the last several days, listening to the numerous accomplishments, some of which he labored for years over, it is evident why his life is being celebrated at this magnitude. He truly made an impact, not just on America, but on the world. So today we celebrate the life of Congressman John Lewis, our Uncle Robert, the man who labored, the man who talked, the man who walked, fought, knelt, sat, held hands with both blacks and whites, bled, lifted his voice, bent his knees, and was willing to give up his life for a righteous cause. Let's continue this celebration of life by taking up the baton that he has now laid down and endeavor to get into trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. Let's not give up. Let's not give in. Let's never give out. Let's keep the faith, keep our eyes on the prize. Rest in power, Uncle Robert. May your legacy live on and never die. We believe you have heard the words from our Heavenly Father. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Well done. And I say to all of us, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Guess what? It's morning time.
A few years ago, Congressman John Lewis attended the inauguration of an American president. And although he had seen many presidents, he made a beeline to this president and asked him to sign his program. He signed the program in this way: "Because of you, John, it's my esteemed honor to welcome back to the Ebenezer pulpit the 44th President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. But before he comes, Jennifer Holliday will come once again. Take my hand, precious Lord. Lead me on."
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me on home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, when the darkness appears and the night draws near and the day has passed and gone. At the river, at the river I stand. God, my feet, Lord, please take my hand. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Hey, hey, oh Lord, we need you right now. We need you right now. We got a world that's in sorrow. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Take my hand, hold my hand, Lord. Guide my feet, Lord. We don't know which way to go. Yeah. Hold us in your unchanging hand. We need you, Lord. Hey, we need you, Lord. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead. Lord, we need you. Lord, we need you right now.
James wrote to the believers, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." It is a great honor to be back in Ebenezer Baptist Church, in the pulpit of its greatest pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to pay my respects to perhaps his finest disciple, an American whose faith was tested again and again to produce a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. John Robert Lewis. to those who have spoken, to Presidents Bush and Clinton, Madam Speaker, Reverend Warnock, Reverend King, John's family, friends, his beloved staff, Mayor Bottoms. I've come here today because I, like so many Americans, owe a great debt to John Lewis and his forceful vision of freedom. You know, this country is a constant work in progress. We're born with instructions to form a more perfect union. Explicit in those words is the idea that we're imperfect, that what gives each new generation purpose is to take up the unfinished work of the last and carry it further than any might have thought possible. John Lewis, first of the Freedom Riders, head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, youngest speaker at the March on Washington, leader of the march from Selma to Montgomery, member of Congress representing the people of this state and this district for 33 years, mentor to young people, including me at the time, until his final day on this earth. He not only embraced that responsibility, but he made it his life's work, which isn't bad for a boy from Troy. John was born into modest means. That means he was poor. In the heart of the Jim Crow South, to parents who picked somebody else's cotton. Apparently, he didn't take to farm work. On days when he was supposed to help his brothers and sisters with their labor, he'd hide under the porch and make a break for the school bus when it showed up. His mother, Willie Mae Lewis, nurtured that curiosity in this shy, serious child. Once you learn something, she told her son, once you get something inside your head, no one can take it away from you. As a boy, John listened through the door after bedtime. His father's friends complained about the Klan. One Sunday as a teenager, he heard Dr. King preach on the radio. As a college student in Tennessee, he signed up for Jim Lawson's workshops on the tactic of nonviolent civil disobedience. John Lewis was getting something inside his head, an idea he couldn't shake, took hold of him, that nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience were the means to change laws, but also change hearts and change minds and change nations and change the world. So he helped organize the Nashville campaign in 1960. He and other young men and women sat at a segregated lunch counter, well-dressed, straight back, refusing to let a milkshake poured on their heads or a cigarette extinguished on their backs or a foot aimed at their ribs. Refused to let that dent their dignity and their sense of purpose. And after a few months, the Nashville campaign achieved the first successful desegregation of public facilities in any major city in the South. John got a taste of jail for the first, second, third, well, several times. But he also got a taste of victory, and it consumed him with righteous purpose, and he took the battle deeper into the South. And that same year, just weeks after the Supreme Court ruled that segregation of interstate bus facilities was unconstitutional, John and Bernard Lafayette bought 2 tickets, climbed aboard a Greyhound, sat up front, and refused to move. This was months before the first official freedom rides. He was doing a test. Trip was unsanctioned. Few knew what they were up to. And at every stop through the night, apparently the angry driver stormed out of the bus and into the bus station. And John and Bernard had no idea what he might come back with or who he might come back with. Nobody was there to protect them. There were no camera crews to record events. Sometimes, Rev, we read about this and we kind of take it for granted. Or at least we act as if it was inevitable. Imagine the courage of 2 people Malia's age, younger than my oldest daughter, on their own, to challenge an entire infrastructure of oppression. John was only 20 years old, but he pushed all 20 of those years to the center of the table, betting everything, all of it, that his example could challenge centuries of convention and generations of brutal violence and countless daily indignities suffered by African Americans. Like John the Baptist preparing the way, like those Old Testament prophets speaking truth to kings. John Lewis did not hesitate, and he kept on getting on board buses and sitting at lunch counters, got his mugshot taken again and again, marched again and again on a mission to change America. Spoke to 250,000 people at the March on Washington when he was just 23. Helped organize the Freedom Summer in Mississippi when he was just 24. At the ripe old age of 25, John was asked to lead the march from Selma to Montgomery. He was warned that Governor Wallace had ordered troopers to use violence. But he and Hosea Williams and others led them across that bridge anyway. And we've all seen the film and the footage and the photographs. President Clinton mentioned the trench coat, the knapsack, the book to read, the apple to eat, the toothbrush. Apparently, jails weren't big on such creature comforts. And you look at those pictures, and John looks so young, and he's small in stature, looking every bit that shy, serious child that his mother had raised, and yet He's full of purpose. God's put perseverance in it. And we know what happened to the marchers that day. Their bones were cracked by billy clubs, their eyes and lungs choked with tear gas. They knelt to pray, which made their heads easier targets. And John was struck in the skull, and he thought he was going to die. Surrounded by the sight of young Americans gagging and bleeding and trampled. Victims in their own country of state-sponsored violence. And the thing is, I imagine initially that day, the troopers thought they'd won the battle. You can imagine the conversations they had afterwards. You can imagine them saying, yeah, we showed them. They figured they'd turn the protesters back over the bridge, that they'd preserved a system that denied the basic humanity of their fellow citizens. Except this time there were some cameras there. This time the world saw what happened, bore witness to black Americans who were asking for nothing more than to be treated like other Americans, who were not asking for special treatment, just equal treatment, promised to them a century before, and almost another century before that. And when John woke up and checked himself out of the hospital, he would make sure the world saw a movement that was, in the words of Scripture, hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. So he returned to Brown Chapel, a battered prophet, bandages around his head. And he said, more marchers will come now. And the people came. And the troopers parted. And the marchers reached Montgomery. And their words reached the White House. And Lyndon Johnson, son of the South, said, we shall overcome. And the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. The life of John Lewis was in so many ways exceptional. It vindicated the faith in our founding, redeemed that faith. That most American of ideas, the idea that any of us, ordinary people without rank or wealth or title or fame, can somehow point out the imperfections of this nation and come together and challenge the status quo and decide that it is in our power to remake this country that we love until it more closely aligns with our highest ideals. What a radical idea. What a revolutionary notion, this idea that any of us, ordinary people, a young kid from Troy, can stand up to the powers and principalities and say, no, this isn't right, this isn't true, this isn't just. We can do better. On the battlefield of justice, Americans like John, Americans like Reverends Lowry and C.T. Vivian, two other patriots that we lost this year, liberated all of us that many Americans came to take for granted. America was built by people like them. America was built by John Lewis's. He, as much as anyone in our history, brought this country a little bit closer to our highest ideals. And someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America. And yet, as exceptional as John was, here's the thing, John never believed that what he did was more than any citizen of this country can do. I mentioned in the statement the day John passed, the thing about John was just how gentle and humble he was. And despite this storied, remarkable career, he treated everyone with kindness and respect because it was innate to him, this idea that any of us can do what he did if we're willing to persevere. He believed that in all of us there exists the capacity for great courage. That in all of us there's a longing to do what's right. That in all of us there's a willingness to love all people and to extend to them their God-given rights to dignity and respect. So many of us lose that sense. It's taught out of us. We start feeling as if, in fact, we can't afford to extend kindness or decency to other people. That we're better off if we're above other people and looking down on them. And so often that's encouraged in our culture. But John always said, he always saw the best in us. And he never gave up and never stopped speaking out because he saw the best in us. He believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. And as a congressman, he didn't rest. He kept getting himself arrested. As an old man, he didn't sit out any fight. Sat in all night long on the floor of the United States Capitol. I know his staff was stressed. But the testing of his faith produced perseverance. He knew that the march is not over, that the race is not yet won, that we have not yet reached that blessed destination where we are judged by the content of our character. He knew from his own life that progress is fragile, that we have to be vigilant against the darker currents of this country's history, of our own history, with their whirlpools of violence and hatred and despair that can always rise again. Bull Connor may be gone, but today we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. Now, I know this is a celebration of John's life. There are some who might say we shouldn't dwell on such things. But that's why I'm talking about it. John Lewis devoted his time on this earth fighting the very attacks on democracy and what's best in America that we're seeing circulate right now. He knew that every single one of us has a God-given power, and that the fate of this democracy depends on how we use it. That democracy isn't automatic. It has to be nurtured. It has to be tended to. We have to work at it. It's hard. And so he knew that it depends on whether we summon a measure, just a measure of John's moral courage to question what's right and what's wrong and call things as they are. He said that as long as he had a breath in his body, he would do everything he could to preserve this democracy. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we have to continue his cause. If we want our children to grow up in a democracy, not just with elections, but a true democracy, a representative democracy, in a big-hearted, tolerant, vibrant, inclusive America of perpetual self-creation, then we're going to have to be more like John. We don't have to do all the things he had to do because he did them for us, but we got to do something. As the Lord instructed Paul, do not be afraid. Go on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. It's just, everybody's got to come out and vote. We got all those people in the city, but they can't do nothing. Like John, we've got to keep getting into that good trouble. He knew that nonviolent protest is patriotic, a way to raise public awareness and put a spotlight on injustice and make the powers that be uncomfortable. Like John, we don't have to choose between protests and politics. It's not an either-or situation. It's a both-and situation. We have to engage in protests where that's effective, but we also have to translate our passion and our causes into laws, institutional practices. That's why John ran for Congress 34 years ago. Like John, we've got to fight even harder for the most powerful tool that we have, which is the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act is one of the crowning achievements of our democracy. It's why John crossed that bridge. It's why he spilled his blood. And by the way, it was the result of Democratic and Republican efforts. President Bush, who spoke here earlier, and his father signed its renewal when they were in office. President Clinton didn't have to because it was the law when he arrived, so instead he made a law to make it easier for people to register to vote. But once the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act, some state legislators unleashed a flood of laws designed specifically to make voting harder, especially, by the way, state legislators where there's a lot of minority turnout and population growth. That's not necessarily a mystery or an accident. It was an attack on what John fought for. It was an attack on our democratic freedoms. And we should treat it as such. If politicians want to honor John, and I'm so grateful for the legacy and work of all the congressional leaders who are here, but there's a better way than a statement calling him a hero. You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for. And by the way, naming it the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that is a fine tribute. But John wouldn't want us to stop there, just trying to get back to where we already were. Once we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we should keep marching to make it even better by making sure every American is automatically registered to vote, including former inmates who've earned their second chance. By adding polling places and expanding early voting and making Election Day a national holiday. So if you are somebody who's working in a factory, or you're a single mom who's got to go to her job and doesn't get time off, you can still cast your ballot by guaranteeing that every American citizen has equal representation in our government, including the American citizens who live in Washington, D.C. and in Puerto Rico. They're Americans. By ending some of the partisan gerrymandering so that all voters have the power to choose their politicians, not the other way around. And if all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do. Now, even if we do all this, even if every bogus voter suppression law is struck off the books today, we've got to be honest with ourselves that too many of us choose not to exercise the franchise. Too many of our citizens believe their vote won't make a difference, or they buy into the cynicism that, by the way, is the central strategy of voter suppression, to make you discouraged, to stop believing in your own power. So we're also going to have to remember what John said. If you don't do everything you can do to change things, then they will remain the same. You only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have. As long as young people are protesting in the streets, hoping real change takes hold, I'm hopeful, but we can't casually abandon them at the ballot box. Not when few elections have been as urgent on so many levels as this one. We can't treat voting as an errand to run if we have some time. We have to treat it as the most important action we can take on behalf of democracy. And like John, we have to give it all we have. I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Reverend Lawson, Bob Moses, and Diane Nash, and others did. And he got that kind of, aw shucks, thank you very much. Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, John, I'm here because of you. And on Inauguration Day in 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too. He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's fitting that the last time John and I shared a public forum was on Zoom. And I'm pretty sure neither he nor I set up the Zoom call because we didn't know how to work it. There's a virtual town hall with a gathering of young activists who had been helping to lead this summer's demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. And afterwards, I spoke to John privately, and he could not have been prouder to see this new generation of activists standing up for freedom and equality, a new generation that was intent on voting and protecting the right to vote. In some cases, a new generation running for political office. And I told him, all those young people, John, of every race and every religion, from every background and gender and sexual orientation, John, those are your children. They learned from your example, even if they didn't always know it. They had understood through him what American citizenship requires, even if they'd only heard about his courage through the history books. by the thousands, faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, have taken our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King said that in the 1960s, and it came true again this summer. We see it outside our windows in big cities and rural towns, in men and women, young and old, straight Americans and LGBTQ Americans, blacks who long for equal treatment, and whites who can no longer accept freedom for themselves while witnessing the subjugation of their fellow Americans. We see it in everybody doing the hard work of overcoming complacency, of overcoming our own fears and our own prejudices, our own hatreds. You see it in people trying to be better, truer versions of ourselves. And that's what John Lewis teaches us. That's where real courage comes from, not from turning on each other, but by turning towards one another. Not by sowing hatred and division, but by spreading love and truth. Not by avoiding our responsibilities to create a better America and a better world, but by embracing those responsibilities with joy and perseverance, and discovering that in our beloved community, we do not walk alone. What a gift John Lewis was. We are all so lucky to have had him walk with us for a while and show us the way. God bless you all. God bless America. God bless this gentle soul who pulled it closer to its promise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are honored to be here. I would like to thank Brother Michael Collins for about a week before Congressman passed. He had called BB, and so BB and I and my sister Cece, we had opportunity to sing to him. And one of the songs, we sang songs differently, but the one song I'd like for everyone that would just join in with me, might say, "We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Upon hearing that, I heard that he opened his eyes, because that was the song that led and was the heart of those marches. My brother Bibi has written another song to the memory of Uncle Robert, as she called him, because he treated us all like family, and I hope you enjoy it.
Sharecroppers working in the heat of the day. Yes, they were.
He knew there was much more, so he asked the Lord to show.
Yes, he did.
All he achieved in his life, we already know.
That he was there when you caught in a hurry. Tell you the truth, don't you worry.
He was willing to fight in the struggle, and he was willing to get in good trouble.
Yes, he was.
Oh,
yes, he was.
He was willing to get in good trouble. He took on the wrongs of this world, like civil and voting rights. No matter the problems he faced, he kept his eyes on the prize.
Oh, and then he learned to walk by faith and believe God until the end. Yes, he did.
Oh, yeah.
And knew we would overcome, and love is gonna win.
He was there when you called, don't you worry. He tell the truth in a hurry.
He was willing to fight for the struggle and willing to get in good trouble. Yes, he was.
Oh,
Yes, he was.
willing to get in good trouble.
And as you put on your robe to go home, we will continue the fight and be strong.
We'll continue to fight.
Continue to fight. He was there when you caught in a hurry. He tell you the truth.
Don't you worry.
He was willing to fight for the struggle.
And he was willing to get in good trouble.
He was willing to fight.
He was ready to fight. He was willing to get in good trouble.
Willing to fight. Ready to fight.
He was
Willing to get in good trouble. He was willing to fight. Willing to fight. Yes, he was willing to get in good trouble. Willing to fight. Ready to fight.
He was
Willing to get in good trouble.
He was
Willing to fight. Ready to fight.
cause he was
Willing to get in good trouble. Willing to fight. Ready to fight.
cause he was
Willing to get in good trouble. Thank you for willing to fight. Thank you for ready to fight. Thank you. Willing to get in good trouble. Willing to fight.
We should be
Ready to fight. And willing to get in good trouble.
Let us pray. And when he shall die, take him and cut him into stars. He shall make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will grow in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. Gracious and loving God, we commend into your safety the soul of your son, John Robert Lewis. You've seen the affidavit of his deeds. Yes, he stayed in trouble. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. He fought the good fight. He finished his course. He kept the faith. And now henceforth is laid up for him a crown of righteousness. But not only to him, but to all those who love God's appearing. Now part of a great mighty cloud of witnesses is he. These are they who have gone through the great tribulation. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. The angels rejoice because he has been vindicated by history. His deeds etched into eternity, and his soul received into your glory. In the name of the God who loves us into freedom and frees us into loving, through Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
We pray that today was a memorable worship experience for all of you. Now, Pastor Warnock will greet the family along with Reverend Dr. Bernice King, and then we will follow the Department of Defense's instructions as they carry out our Representative Lewis. Y'all stand. family may remain seated. Thank you. At this time, as we prepare to depart, we ask that the members of Congress, the extended family, and special invited guests join with us as we enjoy the viral video of our Honorable John Robert Lewis dancing to his favorite song by Pharrell Williams entitled Happy. This is an opportunity for all of us to enjoy this worship experience and to join in and dance with him and clap along if you feel like a room without.
Out of the shot, please, no problem. Hey, excuse me. Sorry.
I said, tell your boss she didn't text you. I'm leaving in the morning. I'll get you all my information. Well, it really needs to be today. Even if we have to arrange something else. I'm going to hear when all this get out of the water. I'm trying to, I'm trying to have a place about madness. Remember this. This is the clay print, so you have to treat it like fine art. So when you frame it, you let them know that. Okay. You don't want nothing all up on the glass. Gotcha. You got to do it like behind. No, they don't have to be shadow, but you know they like to press cheap stuff. Attitude. Let them know it's a fine